Censorship in libraries continues to pose a serious threat, undermining intellectual freedom, diversity, and inclusion. This type of censorship is not isolated. It reflects a broader context in which new concerns and strategies impact various actors, such as publishers, writers, journalists, among others. Hello, everyone. I'm Jonathan Hernandez, chair of the IFLA Advisory Committee on Freedom of Access to Information and Freedom of Expression, and today we'll delve into 5 compelling censorship cases from across the globe, originally presented at the Symposium on Libraries and Censorship in Mexico City. A special thanks to our colleagues from PEN International, Amnesty International, the Brazilian Federation of Library Association, and the Australian Library and Information Association for their invaluable contributions.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Irina Kozikova and I'm the Executive Director of PEN Belarus. It's a honor to join you today and to discuss the challenges facing writers, censorship issues and the freedom of expression in Belarus. A brief introduction to PEN Belarus. We are one of the oldest non-profit organizations in Belarus, but in 2021 we were illegally liquidated by the Belarusian regime. Our team relocated to Warsaw and has continued the work without stopping for a single day. PEN Belarus focuses on 2 areas, creativity and human rights. In the human rights direction, since 2019, PEN Belarus has been monitoring human rights violations in the field of culture and is the only human rights organization in Belarus that deals with writers and other cultural figures as a special category. In 2020, in Belarus, the unfair presidential elections caused mass peaceful demonstrations. Cultural activists were at the forefront of peaceful protests. Belarusian writers, translators, literature researchers, publicists, artists, and intellectuals are among those targeted. I would like to share some critical statistics with you. At the end of July 2024, Belarus has 1,388 political prisoners, including at least 105 cultural figures. Over the past 4 years, there have been more than 5,000 criminal cases. The level of repression and violence in Belarus hasn't decreased since 2020, but the nature of repression has changed. The repressions and human rights violations often take place in the shadow of silence. People are increasingly less likely to share information with the human rights activists and journalists, as they are also repressed for doing so. In today's reality, Belarusian culture as a whole, and cultural figures in particular, face an uphill task of self-preservation. Belarusians have no state responsible for their culture. However, Belarusians inside the country didn't stop resisting, and cultural life in Belarus hasn't stopped. It has gone underground. The culture that forms our identity and independence opposes the ideology of the Russian world. In Belarus, you no longer exist if you are not one of the good guys. Remaining silent is not good enough to become one of good guys in the eyes of the regime. One has to approve the official course publicly, otherwise artists and writers won't get into publishing plans, get a role or an exhibition. Alternatives? Be quiet, hide in a flat or in summer house, or leave the country. Since 2020, thousands of Belarusians have been compelled to leave their homeland due to security concerns. Among them are many famous writers, such as Nobel Peace Laureate Svetlana Alexievich, and famous musicians, artists, and even national theater groups. The level of censorship is incredibly high. Be quiet or end up behind bars is the main idea of the regime in Belarus. Belarusians are persecuted for likes and comments on social media for using historical national symbols. Since the aftermath of the 2020 presidential election in Belarus, more than a dozen independent publishing houses have been liquidated or forced to relocate. The banned books list continues to grow. Officials considered 52 artistic, historical, and scientific works as extremist, removed them from the retail stores, and destroyed them. The last issue I want to talk about is writers in prison. At the end of July 2024, there are no fewer than 38 writers in prison in Belarus. And I have a personal connection to the topic, as my brother Maxim Znak is a writer and an advocate imprisoned in Belarus now, sentenced to 10 years of prison. Hundreds of poems, short stories, and novels were born in detention, but only some reached us through letters. His example shows that despite the limitations, writers continue to create even behind the bars. We, his family, were fortunate to receive his book, The Cameron, written during his first year of prison, and to publish it. Since February 2023, for a year and a half, Maxim has been completely isolated from the outside world. The authorities have deprived him of lawyer's visit, phone calls, and correspondence, which is called incommunicator status and considered as a torture by human rights organizations. The same situation with the incommunicator status remains for some other political prisoners. We definitely know about 6 such cases. We also documented that imprisoned writers are periodically placed in solitary confinement for the extended periods, where they are forbidden to use even paper and pens. Even reading books is prohibited. They are left alone with just burials, which is definitely a form of torture for a creative person. We know for certain that writers are continuing to write books in prison, but unfortunately, currently there is no opportunity to receive and to preserve them. Undoubtedly, this is a tremendous loss for Belarusian literature and society. We have hundreds of absurd stories and examples of censorship, but due to time constraints, I cannot share all of them today. If you are interested in learning more about the situation in Belarus, I encourage you to visit website at penbelarus.org. Today, I urge the international community to support and protect cultural figures in Belarus and to support cultural organizations and human rights defenders outside of Belarus. We must advocate for the end of the incommunicator status and for the releasing of political prisoners. We are tired, but we continue our struggle for human rights, for our identity, culture, independence, and believe in changes. Thank you for your attention.
Hello, my name is Áron Demeter. I'm the head of research and communication at Amnesty International. We conduct research, among other things, on the situation of the Hungarian LGBTI community, and I would like to share some findings that show how the Hungarian government, instead of advocating for equality, has created fear, chilling effect, self-censorship in Hungary. In 2021, Hungary passed the propaganda law, a legislation aimed at curtailing the discussions and portrayals of LGBTI people, primarily in the schools and the media, but with an effect way far more reaching. This law has reinforced negative stereotypes and limited freedom of expression. The law has entrenched discriminatory attitudes and created a pervasive chilling effect within the media, advertising, and publishing industries. The journey of the propaganda law began on the 25th May 2021 when Fidesz MPs submitted a bill targeting pedophile offences. By the 10th of June, the Parliament's Legislative Committee had introduced amendments that significantly shifted the bill's focus to restricting LGBTI content. This move sparked condemnation from civil society and EU institutions for being discriminatory and stigmatizing towards LGBTI people. On the 14th of June, a day before the parliamentary vote, over 10,000 people protested the proposal in front of the Hungarian parliament in Budapest. Despite widespread domestic and international criticism, the governing majority of the parliament adopted the law on the 15th of June. The law includes amendments to various acts prohibiting the depiction or promotion of diverse gender identities and sexual orientations in public communication. This has led to significant restrictions on people's right to access information, which is a key part of freedom of expression. On the 15th of July 2021, the European Commission started an infringement proceedings against Hungary, citing potential breaches of several rights outlined in the Charter of Fundamental Rights and fundamental EU values. Subsequently, on the 2nd of December 2021, the Commission issued a reasoned opinion asserting that Hungary had failed to meet its obligations under various EU directives. Due to Hungary's unsatisfactory response to the reasoned opinion, the Commission escalated the matter by referring the case to the Court of Justice of the EU. The propaganda law has cast a shadow of fear over Hungary. According to Amnesty Hungary's research, media, advertising and publishing industries are grappling with self-censorship to avoid severe penalties. This chilling effect silences voices that should be heard, but helps spread misinformation and foster discrimination. The impact of the so-called propaganda law on the bookstores and authors is profound. Bookshops face fines for displaying LGBTI inclusive books without packaging. Therefore, they had to recategorize youth literature as adult content and adjust contracts and product placements to comply with the law. The law's broad interpretation and the fear it instilled in new writers. Lira, a Hungarian book publishing company, faced fines for displaying books featuring same-sex couples without proper labeling. In July 2023, after the Consumer Protection Office imposed a substantial fee on Lira for not wrapping the book Heartstopper in a transparent film, the company took legal action. Authors and writers like Dora Pop have had to reclassify their works from youth literature to the category of adults in order to comply with the law, amending it from material suitable for children to material meant for adults only, by facing threats and harassment on social media. The government decree on commercial activities, which is part of the propaganda law, does not regulate libraries. However, there are general restrictions on access to materials that depict or promote homosexuality and gender reassignment to those under 18. These restrictions present challenges for libraries in providing inclusive and comprehensive access to information. The law's lack of differentiation among various age groups under 18 fails to recognize the distinct development stages and informational needs of older adolescents compared to younger children. This one-size-fits-all approach is problematic for libraries, which must navigate these regulations while trying to serve high school students who require access to scientific and literary works typically housed in adult collections. Moreover, the enforcement of these regulations in library settings has already led to instances of confusion and overreach. This severely disrupts the library's function. To ensure that libraries can continue to serve as vital resources for all community members, including those under 18, it's crucial for lawmakers to balance the protection of minors with the fundamental right to access diverse and informative content, instead of creating hate and fear against minority groups. The media landscape has also been reshaped by the propaganda law. RTL, which is a major commercial TV channel, shifted certain programs to later time slots to avoid penalties, and streaming content ratings were adjusted. Complaints to the Hungarian Media Council have led to cautious content programming, further illustrating the law's chilling effect on freedom of expression in the media. The Media Council's updated recommendation on age rating of media content requires restrictive categorization even if a single element of a program is deemed inappropriate. This has led to significant changes in programming, with content featuring LGBTI characters being pushed to late-night slots or excluded entirely. The propaganda law serves to strengthen negative attitudes, stereotypes, and discriminatory practices against LGBTI people, creating a harmful cycle of bias and prejudice that hinders efforts to promote inclusivity and equality. Moreover, discriminatory and stigmatizing comments by Hungarian officials against LGBTI people have become prevalent in public discourse in recent years. The propaganda law entrenches discriminatory attitudes by limiting the types of content that can be published about LGBTI people, making it impossible to accurately portray their lives, struggles, and stories. This friction on information dissemination fosters an atmosphere of fear and hesitation, undermining the efforts of human rights defenders and civil society organizations to promote inclusivity and equality. Amnesty International Hungary asserts that the propaganda law is unlawful and detrimental to human rights. It has created a cloud of fear, limited access to information, and fostered discrimination against the LGBTI community. This law must be repealed to restore freedom of expression and combat the stigmatization of LGBTI people. Thank you for your attention and have a great conference. Goodbye.
Bom, o que eu vim conversar com vocês é sobre a censura de livros no Brasil, né, um pouco do histórico, né, de algumas situações que já enfrentamos e estamos enfrentando, e os desafios e ações que a gente vem realizando para tentar combater qualquer tentativa de censura. Então, o Brasil tem experimentado uma polarização política e social significativa, marcado por profundas diferenças ideológicas, econômicas, culturais e sociais, e essa polarização se manifesta em divisões acentuadas entre diferentes segmentos da sociedade, muitas vezes alinhada com afiliações políticas, interesses econômicos e identidades culturais. Essas divisões se intensificaram nos últimos anos, contribuindo para uma situação social fragmentada, né, com tensões crescentes entre grupos expostos. E a propagação de discursos, aí, especialmente através das redes sociais, tem então aumentado significativamente a polarização do Brasil, né, onde políticos, figuras públicas e influenciadores, né, frequentemente usam uma linguagem provocativa para mobilizar seus apoiadores e também atingir seus adversários. E as plataformas, né, de redes sociais, com seus algoritmos projetados para maximizar, né, o engajamento, tende a ampliar os conteúdos, então, sensacionalistas, né, e divisivos, criando, então, bolhas de eco que reforçam, então, o preconceito existentes e aprofundam, então, as divisões sociais. E com isso, o ambiente polarizado levou a uma redução da tolerância para as opiniões diversas e debates saudáveis, onde indivíduos e grupos estão cada vez mais relutantes em engajar-se, até mesmo ouvir pontos de vista diferentes, né? Isso tem sufocado o diálogo significativo e comprometendo o princípio democrático da discussão aberta, onde diferentes perspectivas podem ser debatidas e compreendidas. Então, a polarização acentuada também criou um clima de medo em relação à censura e pressão sobre a mídia e de autores também, onde jornalistas, escritores e editores frequentemente enfrentam aí represárias quanto ao seu trabalho, desafiando narrativas dominantes ou expondo verdades desconfortáveis. E essa pressão pode vir tanto de autores governamentais, né, de políticos, quanto também não governamentais, né, incluindo então grupos políticos, de interesses privados e de redes sociais também. E no Brasil há uma preocupação crescente com a censura velada, onde as intimidações, ameaças ou processos judiciais são usados para silenciar as vozes, né, desistentes, onde jornalistas e meios de comunicação podem ser alvos de ações legais ou ameaças de violência, criando então um efeito de intimidação que desencoraja reportagens críticas, jornalismos investigativos. E essa forma de censura então mina a liberdade de imprensa, de liberdade de expressão, e restringe o fluxo de informações necessários, então, para uma democracia saudável. E a polarização no Brasil contribui também para a disseminação de desinformação e fake news, que são frequentemente usadas para reforçar crenças de grupos, desacreditar pontos de vista opostos informações, né, então falsas ou enganosas são disseminadas através, então, principalmente das redes sociais, né, ou outros canais de mídia, tornando aí bem difícil para o público distinguir o que é fato e o que é ficção, né? Então essa proliferação de desinformação corrói então a confiança da mídia tradicional e outras instituições, então aprofundando ainda mais as divisões entre a sociedade. E dessa forma, a desinformação é usada de forma estratégica para minar vozes e opiniões, né, aliadas a narrativas dominantes, e ao espalhar informações falsas, né, atores podem manipular a percepção pública, semear confusão, deslegitimar seus oponentes, e essa tática particularmente eficaz em um ambiente polarizado, que é a situação do Brasil, onde os indivíduos são mais propensos a aceitar informações, né, que confirmem as suas crenças, né, e também a intensa polarização política e social do Brasil apresenta aí desafios significativos para as instituições democráticas, né, ampliando aí o uso das redes sociais, a redução da tolerância de opiniões diversas, o medo de censura e a disseminação de desinformação, que contribui então para um ambiente onde o diálogo construtivo é sufocado e a confiança dos processos democráticos é minada. E abordar essas questões requer uma abordagem multifacetada, né, que promova, então, a alfabetização mediática, né, incentive o diálogo e o debate aberto e respeitoso, e principalmente proteja a liberdade de expressão e liberdade de acesso à informação para todos os indivíduos, né, de todos os lugares, que é uma das premissas que a gente trabalha, principalmente no ambiente, né, da prestação de serviços das bibliotecas. Né, e com isso, né, um pequeno parâmetro aí do que vem acontecendo no Brasil, né, e também as leis que amparam, mas também desafiam o combate à censura, o que a gente vem feito para tentar combater a censura no Brasil. Né, porque, como tinha colocado, né, nos últimos anos houve vários casos notáveis e terríveis de tentativas de censura no Brasil, refletidos aí então, né, pela polarização política e ideológica no país, como eu apresentei no início. E um exemplo recente, né, e que ficou muito marcado e ainda está sendo discutido no Brasil, é o recente tentativa de censura do livro Avesso da Pele, do autor Jefferson Tenório. E esta obra, que aborda questões como violência policial e racismo, foi alvo de tentativa de censura em escolas de uma região aqui do Brasil, né, na verdade de 2 estados brasileiros, onde a diretora da escola classificou o vocabulário do livro como inadequado para estudantes de ensino médio, resultando aí na retirada dos exemplares em todas as bibliotecas escolares. E o autor destacou que esses episódios de censura estão frequentemente ligados à polarização política, né, no Brasil, como a gente mencionou. Com isso, a nossa Federação Nacional de Associações Bibliotecárias, né, a FEBAB, tem aí, desde 2020, na verdade, com uma campanha chamada Bibliotecas que Não Se Calam, né, aqui a censura não tem vez, onde trabalha aí, né, para dar espaço para as pessoas relatarem, né, as tentativas, situações, os obstáculos que vem enfrentando em relação a tentativas e à censura nas bibliotecas, onde eles podem colocar tanto esses relatos e, por meio desses relatos, né, reforçar aí a discussão pública e ações aí de repúdio, né, da sociedade civil contra essa tentativa de censura, né? Aqui até tem um QR Code, se alguém tiver interesse de conhecer o site da FEBAB, onde tem uma página específica que trabalha e atua, né, e com toda essa questão de censura por meio do projeto Bibliotecas que Não Se Calam. Aqui a censura não tem vez. E também com isso a FEBAB trouxe aí uma série de vídeos, né, trabalhando sobre essa questão de censura, né, do Brasil, aí, onde eles trazem aí de forma de vídeos, né, onde pessoas relatam aí as tentativas de censura, né. Claro que as pessoas que estão aí nos vídeos não são os autores, né, desses relatos, né, por questões, né, de privacidade, são pessoas que fazem parte da diretoria da FEBAB que leiam, né, então esses relatos aí e que possa ser disseminado além do site ali com os relatos, mas também através de vídeo para disseminar ainda e aumentar aí as discussões sobre a necessidade de combater qualquer tipo de censura de livros e de liberdade de expressão e de acesso à informação. Um trabalho que foi muito bem reconhecido, muito bem visto e ainda está sendo muito utilizado no cenário brasileiro, principalmente aí nas redes sociais da nossa Federação Nacional de Associações Bibliotecárias, a FEBAB. Então, com isso, eu finalizo a minha apresentação. Espero ter contribuído para as discussões desse grande evento realizado aí no México. Infelizmente, eu não pude estar presente, né? Mas eu deixo meu abraço, meu agradecimento especial, principalmente ao professor Jonathan, né, pelo convite, que a gente é um grande parceiro aí que trabalha junto com a gente no Five. E aqui ficam meus contatos, né, tanto das minhas redes sociais como do meu e-mail, caso alguém tiver algum questionamento, alguma dúvida, ou queira receber mais informações sobre a situação no Brasil, né, da censura, da tentativa de censura de livros e de liberdade de expressão e de acesso à informação, eu estou disponível, tá? Então, no demais, agradeço novamente e desejo a todos e a todas um excelente evento, né, e que possamos aí juntos unir nossas forças e unir as forças das nossas bibliotecas, né, para combater qualquer tipo de censura, né, de livros, qualquer tipo de censura de liberdade à expressão e à liberdade de acesso à informação. Um grande abraço e até breve.
Hello, I'm Trish Hepworth. I'm the Deputy CEO for the Australian Library and Information Association, and it's a pleasure to be asked to join with you as you discuss the really important and pressing issues of libraries and censorship, and to share a case study from Australia. I'm coming today from the lands of the Ngunnawal and the Ngambri peoples, and I pay my respects to elders past and present, and I extend my respect to all First Nations people who are joining with us today. It was Monday, 5 May. The next day, we were starting the Alia National Conference, where 650 library people would gather on Kaurna country to network, to celebrate, to share knowledge. Monday was a day of preparation, of workshops, of board meetings, of annual general meetings. It was a busy day, and in the middle of that day, we got word that a Western Sydney council had passed a motion to rid the council libraries of all same-sex parent books. We were surprised. We had been supporting libraries facing challenges for almost 18 months. However, up until this point, we had always known before any such motions had gone to council, and were able to work with the library services and the council executive to ensure that they were supported with the information they would need, that the council motions would not succeed. Putting our library research skills to the test, we found the council minutes and discovered that what had happened was that there had been a council meeting where many of the councillors were away, and one particular councillor had opportunistically taken the motion for the library strategy being approved to put in an unanticipated motion around ridding the same-sex parent books, which had not been raised with the library beforehand and had not been foreshadowed to the wider council. We then spent a very busy night contacting our key people within the library sector as well as within the wider art sector, and also our allies in the LGBTQIA+ rights sector, so that we could be sure that we would have a coordinated response. Alia hasn't been seeking media on book challenges, as we don't want libraries to be seen as an easy way to grab headlines and recruit people to remove more books from libraries. And generally, we haven't needed the media in order to ensure that books have stayed on shelves. However, this case was obviously different, and by the next day we had national media attention across newspapers, television and radio. ALIA had spokespeople who were able to respond to media queries, but we're very happy for allies to lead the public response. Equality Australia, for example, who fights for LGBTQIA+ people's rights, launched a petition that garnered more than 5,000 signatures by the time of the next council meeting. It's useful sometimes for other groups to talk to the importance of professional library staff making collection management decisions and the importance of the freedom to read. It's also powerful when we have people who talk personally about the importance of respectful collections and inclusive collections and being able to see all people, including in this case LGBTQIA+ families, in library collections. As well as having this particular ban overturned, we needed to ensure that other opportunistic councillors didn't think that this might be an easy way to get national headlines at other councils. And so we worked with key library partners to ensure that we were using our legal and political levers. In New South Wales, local councils enter into an agreement with the state government that allows state government funding to support their library services, but in return, local councils promise that they won't censor their collections. The Arts Minister, John Graham, was able to write a very strong letter to the local council, reminding them of their obligations under the agreement and warning them that if they didn't comply with that agreement, that they may lose their state funding. We also received advice from our pro bono lawyers, Dowson Turco lawyers, around potential breaches of the Local Government Act and the Discrimination Act, and wrote a serious letter through to the council outlining the legal concerns. Through all this, support for library staff was paramount. From those people in the library who were dealing face-to-face with disappointed or upset members of the community, through to senior management who were often in that challenging position where they knew things that they were not able to communicate more widely. We know that staff in these situations come under immense pressure. ALIA made personal contact with library staff, but also local networks in the public libraries surrounding the council were able to offer support. We were also able to have statements from the ALIA board and other library and associated organisations, both here and internationally, that showed that the library sector was supporting the library staff and upholding the fundamental freedom to read. Just over a week later, the ban was reversed. Looking back at the swift overturn of the ban, a couple of strengths really stand out. We had been prepared. ALIA had worked with public library staff to make sure we had resources available and had run training for public library managers in New South Wales. The processes and systems we had put in place for the reporting of book challenges meant that we had the information quickly and were able to disseminate that information through our networks. Those networks also were there to support library staff every step of the way. Our strong relationships with external parties meant that we were able to have a coordinated response. And the people in the library were an absolute source of inspiration, as well as the vast majority of Australians who stood in solidarity and support with the library staff. Of course, the overturn in some ways was just the beginning. Since then, we have had a significant increase in challenges, as is usual when one of these book challenges hits the media. We know that the groups who are leading the challenges to books in libraries use this as an opportunity to test their messages and to recruit more people to their cause. I cannot stress enough the importance of ongoing support for library staff. Even those who are not directly experiencing a challenge are obviously acting in a time of heightened awareness, and it's really important that mental well-being and support are there. It has given us a valuable opportunity to incorporate the lessons learnt into our resources and into our training, and a really wonderful opportunity to strengthen our relationships. And I can't personally stress enough how important it is to remember to credit those who've helped and to remember to say thank you. With the challenges ongoing, we are always interested in sharing resources and learning from other national associations facing similar challenges. And I hope to hear from you all, and good luck protecting the freedom to read.